this video, we're going to build an abandoned factory. I've been building up a pretty sizable pile of recycled materials, and this project seemed like a good way to make a dent in that pile. So for this build, I'm going to try and use as many recycled materials as I can. I spent a few hours trying to come up with ideas for things you would see in a factory, like different types of machinery and smokestacks, using mostly caps and bottles. This is very much a figure it out as you go project. It's not the fastest method of construction, but it is arguably the most fun method. After getting some of the ideas together, I laid out some boxes to get the basic shape of the factory. I then divided it up into sections, and I cut out some pieces of tempered hardboard for the bases. Rough side down, of course. I wanted these sections to be able to fit together in different ways, but I also wanted them to work well as standalone buildings. I also wanted to be able to use these as background buildings for battle reports. And I didn't plan this, but I later realized that when I laid out the buildings in a certain way, they took up just enough space to make a full-size skirmish board. So this is also going to be a skirmish board. For the first layer, I glued down some styrofoam packaging. These pieces have some nice indentations on them that kind of look like a foundation for a building. I supported the styrofoam bases with columns of plastic caps and more styrofoam. I was just trying to find a way to use up some caps here. I thought that was a pretty good way to use up my huge pile of caps. I used a combination of hot glue and construction adhesive for the majority of this build. Hot glue to set the pieces in place quickly, and construction adhesive for a stronger bond. I layered pieces of styrofoam in small boxes on top of each other, and slowly but surely the factory started to take shape. Along the way, I tried to get a general idea of how I wanted the open areas of the factory to look. I wanted playable space on the inside, but I didn't want the entire factory to be open. This piece looks like some kind of generator to me, but it is pretty flimsy. So to strengthen it up, I smeared some tacky glue on the underside of it, and I poured some sand onto that. This ended up being a pretty effective way to strengthen plastic containers. I think you're going to see me using this technique a lot. I wanted the east wing to look like it was heavily damaged, with mostly just the basic skeleton of the structure left, and a wraparound rubble staircase from one floor to another. This section looks like it could have been some kind of food processing area maybe. I don't really have any particular type of factory that I'm going for here, by the way. Also, I think a dense patchwork of wires could look pretty cool here. I'm definitely going to be adding a lot of Grimdark wiring to this build. I'll add some more support to this roof later. I'm going to add a lot more detail to this, but that's looking pretty good for now. On to the next building. For the west wing, I wanted a pretty classic brick factory look. I built out the walls using these styrofoam insulation slabs that I've had for a while. I cut a large section of the back away to make the inside more accessible. For the brickwork, I used air-dry clay, and some texture rollers I 3D printed. These rollers are 100% free and they're available to download on Cults 3D. There's quite a few of them available. I'll put the link below if you're interested. I don't have a proper rolling pin, so I had to improvise. I used a construction adhesive tube to roll thin strips of clay. I don't know why I thought taping wax paper to this cutting board was necessary here. I wouldn't suggest doing that. The wax paper ended up peeling off. The only thing I really ended up accomplishing with that was getting that sticky residue from the tape on my cutting board, and now my cutting board is all sticky. I found the best way to roll these bricks was to pull the roller towards me about half a turn at a time while trying to keep the brick line as straight as possible. With this project, any imperfections will just add to the aged building effect. So if the bricks aren't perfectly flat, that's not really a big deal. To dry those, I set them out in the sun and I occasionally flipped them. While those were drying, I traced out where I wanted my windows to be. Next, I created some stairs using strips of cardboard and poster board. I used the poster board as a spacer between the steps, and that leaves just enough room to be able to socket a mini in between each step. I also added this gangway, which I later had to rip out because it was in the way. Now for that brickwork, I carefully cut away the brick slabs to create wall sections that were cracked and crumbling apart. Air dry clay is fairly brittle, so it needs a good amount of support, so I made sure to cover the entire underside of these brick wall pieces with construction adhesive, and I'm also going to go over this with Mod Podge when it's good and dry. I used this technique on the entire wall. I tried to cut sections away to blend in the join lines on the brick wall pieces. If you cut these out the right way, you can kind of zipper them together. I used the corner of a cereal box for the corner pieces here. That method works pretty well because they already have a nice clean fold line. To get the shape right, I held the brick slabs against the wall and then I traced out where I wanted the cut to be with my hobby knife. So the folks at the Hot Wire Foam Factory were kind enough to send me this set of hot wire cutters and a few other products, which I appreciate very much. Thank you for that. So we're going to try using some of these out on this project. I am most excited to try out the router that they sent me, but I don't think it's going to get much use with this particular project, but in the future I will be using that. I used the hot wire knife to cut out the windows, using a metal ruler as a guide. It did a pretty good job. If I had a proper jig, I could have probably made cleaner cuts, but these are good enough for my purposes. We're just gonna hide those crooked cuts with cardboard later. A lot of old factories have bricked over windows, and that was one thing I wanted to try and recreate with this building. To create that effect, I took the window cutouts and cut about a 1/4 inch off of them, and then I glued bricks to them and I just glued them in place. Pretty simple. I decided to leave 3 windows open on this wall, and these are just high enough for a standard trooper to stand in. I think they're just shy of 2 inches tall. I tried making some window headers and footers with EVA foam. I wanted to see if I could use the engraver tool to engrave some bricks into the EVA. I wasn't really that happy with how that turned out. This engraver tool is too wide for something like this. I think it could be good for other things, but not this in particular. I ended up redoing this just using the hot wire knife instead, and that got a much cleaner line. After adding the window trim, I added a bit of brickwork to this side of the building as well. On this side, the brickwork is going to be more ornamental though. I also added some pieces of cereal box cardboard to the bottom half to give it a little bit more detail, make it look a little less like a piece of styrofoam, and more like the bottom floor of a factory. I also cut away some sections of styrofoam and embedded some bricks to make it look like the outer shell of the building was falling off, revealing the bricks underneath. For the windows at the top of this factory, I took a hint from Eric's Hobby Workshop, and I 3D printed some window frames. I found this window for free on Cults 3D. I'll link that down below if you want it. So I scaled it down to size and I printed out a few. I was hoping to avoid using 3D printing for this project, but for stuff like this, I think it makes a lot of sense, if you have the option. My second attempt at window headers were much nicer looking. I gave them more of an arch this time and carved 4 bricks on each side between the main headstone. Is it headstone or is it cornerstone? I think it might be cornerstone. Okay, I just Googled it and neither of those are right. That is called a keystone. I decided to leave the footers. I think they look good enough. So I think I'm going to call this part 1 at this point. I've put quite a bit of work into this. I think it's about time to make a video. I don't think I realized what I was getting myself into with this project. It's been a lot of fun though. I've never done brickwork like this and I'm really enjoying the process of putting this stuff together, and I think it's looking pretty good. The sand and glue technique worked pretty well. These are a lot more solid than these. See that? Much better. So they're gonna sit in here. Yeah, I don't even want to think about this too much yet. This is kind of like the original setup, and then one of my main goals with this was to make something that's big enough that I can use it as a background, because I really want to have backgrounds on my battle reports. I'd like my scenes to kind of feel like they're part of like a larger world and you can kind of see like what's going on behind the battlefield. So I think these buildings are going to act as borders most of the time, just kind of sitting on the back of the battlefield, just kind of creating a little bit more atmosphere. I would like each building to be able to stand alone, but also be able to be like combined. I was just trying to make each side look a little unique so I could get as much out of them as possible. It's not super modular, but like in that sense it's modular. There's no modularity like within these mini buildings, but together as a set they're modular, so I don't know. I guess calling them modular might be a little generous.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. Anxiety filling up every space, no privacy. And silently it could build and build until you find.
And a wraparound staircase, and a wraparound rubble staircase, and a wraparound rubble staircase, and a wrap.